All right. Hello, everyone. It is 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern, so I think we're going to go ahead and begin to respect everyone's time. My name is Daniel Eliot. I'm Director of Education and Strategic Initiatives at the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and I'm going to be your moderator today. We've assembled a great panel of experts to talk about the abundance of COVID-19 scams that you may have already seen, or that you should at least be aware of, hypervigilant, if you will, because there are just so many circling around right now. And so we've brought together, like I said, a great group of people who are going to share over the next hour some of the scams that they're seeing. And then we'll wrap it up with some best practices on how you can identify some of these scams and what you can share with some of your friends and family so they can be more vigilant and protect themselves against scams. And so just so you're aware, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you along with a PDF of the PowerPoint probably tomorrow once we have it posted to the StaySafeOnline.org website. Again, so this webinar is being recorded. So who is the National Cybersecurity Alliance? So the National Cybersecurity Alliance is a nonprofit public-private partnership devoted to cybersecurity, education, and awareness. And we do that by convening partners who recognize strength in the security collective, what we can do as a group together to expand awareness. We do that by educating individuals and organizations on cybersecurity best practices. And then we amplify collective efforts to increase cybersecurity awareness. So we share out resources from our partners like who's on the webinar today, Federal Trade Commission, Trend Micro, and Generali Global Assistance, all the great work that the public sector and the private sector is doing. We try to amplify those efforts as much as possible to increase awareness. We also do this through large-scale national campaigns. So October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month every year, and we co-lead that with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So we encourage you to participate in National Cybersecurity Awareness Month this October, and you can learn more about that at StaySafeOnline.org. We also lead Data Privacy Day for North America, and Data Privacy Day is recognized on January 28th. Again, you can take an active part in Data Privacy Day by going to StaySafeOnline.org and learning more about that program and what you can do to educate your business partners, your families, your customers, yourselves on privacy in particular. Another campaign that we run on a national scale is CyberSecure My Business. And this is really where we focus on the small and medium-sized enterprise. It doesn't even have to be a for-profit. It could be a small to medium-sized government or a small to medium-sized nonprofit. But we're focusing on those under-resourced organizations. How can we put resources and information into their hands? And so we do that through webinars. This webinar is part of the Cybersecure My Business webinar series. And we do monthly webinars that are all free and open to the public. We used to, and hope to get back to at some point, do in-person workshops where we bring together local community partners, national community partners, and small businesses and have small group discussions about what steps small, medium-sized organizations can take to improve their security posture. And we also have a newsletter that we push out regularly to subscribers with tips and new resources and information so they can remain apprised of the most current trends and news going on that's relevant to the small, medium-sized business community. And all of this is free and open to the public because of our national sponsors. We wouldn't be able to do this without their support. Trend Micro is our signature sponsor and has been for multiple years. And we want to thank them for, again, making all of this available to you for free. Our newest partner is Generali Global Assistance as our affiliate sponsor. We want to thank them for coming on in 2020 as an affiliate sponsor and, again, utilizing their expertise and resources to provide your support. And that our strategic partner, ITSP Magazine for helping us to let people know what we're doing in this space. So now I'm gonna go silent and you're gonna hear from our experts here. And we're gonna start off with Lesley Fair, who's the Senior Attorney of Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission. She's really gonna set the foundation or the stage for us when it comes to scams and highlight all the great work that the Federal Trade Commission is doing in this space. She'll be followed by John Clay, who's a cybersecurity expert and director of global threat communications at Trend Micro. And he'll be laying the groundwork as far as what we're seeing on the cybersecurity side and scams. Bill Malik will follow up, John, and Bill's the Vice President of Infrastructure Security Strategies at Trend Micro. And he's really going to be talking about some best practices, following up on what John Clay talked about. And we'll be transitioning to our Patrice Bobola, who's going to be wrapping up, tying a nice bow around the content. And Patrice is the head of global IDP knowledge and QA at Generali Global Assistance. And he's going to bring it all home for us today. And then we're going to go into some Q&A to answer your questions. And there are about 300 people, over 300 people registered for this webinar. So we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can, but understand we're a little outnumbered, but we're going to stick around and answer as many questions as we can. And so with that, I'm going to unmute Lesley here and transition over to her. Lesley, are you here with us?
I am. Thank you very much. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity, especially at a time that I hate to say it, it is the perfect storm for scams. And I say this as a 33-year veteran of the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Consumer Protection. We have always looked at consumer protection in three primary ways. Certainly the false advertising kind of cases, the scam cures or the iffy and questionable advertising claims. Then we have the financial scams, the people who are trying to rip people off financially. And then, of course, what we started seeing about 25 years ago are the data thieves and the imposter scams and folks trying to rip people off that way. What we've started to see here is the confluence of all three of those. That's the bad news. The good news I can tell you is that the small but scrappy Bureau of Consumer Protection at the FTC is open for business and on the job. The next slide shows what we're trying to do to deal with this very unusual circumstance that we're dealing with. The most important thing we're trying to do is encourage consumers and businesses to report what they're seeing in the marketplace. We are a Bureau of Consumer Protection, has about 300 employees at the FTC. As I always tell people, that's kind of a medium-sized Indianapolis law firm. So, we need to have eyes and ears of other people, well-meaning and public-spirited citizens and businesses who go to ftc.gov/complain and let us know what they're seeing. So we analyze those reports from consumers. We also have been doing a lot to warn businesses who may be engaged in possible illegal conduct. And I can show you a little bit of what we're doing in that area. We certainly want to educate consumers and businesses about how to protect themselves from all the kinds of scams we're seeing out there. Anytime we can train a consumer or a business person to say, that looks suspicious to me, I'm not going to click. We look upon that as a savings to taxpayers and a win for the good guys. So we're happy to do that. And finally, when we have to, and so far we have had to, we will bring law enforcement actions. We will go to court to shut the bad guys down or to stop what they're doing. So those are the ways that so far the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection is dealing with this unprecedented circumstance. The next slide shows every day we publicly post what we're seeing with regard to COVID-19 complaints. And so you can go to our website. Our Explore Data site is readily available at ftc.gov. And you can also manipulate and look to see what's going on, for example, in your state, or what the typical dollar amounts are. We divide things up so far, and I think these were Friday's reports. We've received close to 32,000 complaints from consumers, complaining of $22 million of fraud. Medium fraud loss is over $500. Those numbers are scary enough in and of themselves, but let's face it, the one area of loss most sensitive to people who are on this call, cyber losses, are losses that most consumers aren't going to know about and aren't going to complain about. So those numbers, I would suggest, grossly underestimate what people are actually facing out there, because we are not yet at a stage where we can quantify what the loss in consumer data has been, what the unauthorized credit card charges, identity theft, all those things very often aren't included in these. However, I do think, for 5 minutes a couple times a week to take a look at what the data is showing, just to have kind of an example of what's going on and what consumers are complaining about. The next slide shows another aspect of what we're doing, which are kind of the 4 areas of scams we're seeing. Certainly the unproven cures and treatments. Some of these are just flat out frauds, telling people that their crazy ingredient can actually cure people who are suffering from serious stages of coronavirus. Others of them, I think, are more marketers attempting to exploit the current state of the marketplace. A company saying, use our product, it will prevent coronavirus, when what they're selling is hand soap. There are ways to truthfully say, listen, washing your hands regularly is a good step to reducing your risk. We sell a nice hand soap, use our hand soap. That's way different from in the FTC parlance, from buy our product to prevent or cure coronavirus. We're also seeing all kinds of stimulus check scams. These are both dealing with small business, people who have been applying for the PPP programs through the SBA, as well as consumers who are receiving checks. These are scams where people say, I can get you your money quicker, I can double your money, I'm from the SBA, and give me your information and I can expedite financial benefits to you. We're also seeing what we're looking at as the next wave of scams, which is the financial impact fraud. It's beginning to look a lot like 2009 all over again. We're seeing, as people are not able to make their house payments, as people are struggling to make their car notes, we're seeing the same forms of scams we saw a decade ago with the financial meltdown and fiscal crisis. So we're seeing a lot of predatory players in the marketplace that are claiming for cash, of course, to be able to help people who've lost their jobs get work, get supplemental income, and perhaps be able to save their house, pay their bills, things along those lines. Then the fourth, and we have speakers who are going to be talking about this an awful lot as soon as I finish my comments, are the email compromise, the identity theft scams, the imposter scams, that what's really involved flat out is the theft of data, that they are scammers who are attempting to steal personal information. What's so interesting, though, is that we think those other 3 forms of fraud, once we're able to peel the onion, what may be behind them is data theft too. That maybe some of the cure scams we're seeing are really scams to get people's credit card numbers and personal information or health information. We're not yet sure the extent to which that's happening, but those are the 4 areas where so far our main focus has been in dealing with coronavirus-related scams and frauds. The next slide will let you know what you already know, because you're working from home, is the high proportion of these that are being perpetrated via robocall. We have on our website taped excerpts of the kinds of robocalls people are getting. These are aimed both at consumers saying, here are the, we have easy access to a test kit, or someone has tested positive, call this number for more information. We're getting small businesses that are getting calls that are claiming to be from local health authorities or from the SBA. So it's interesting to see that in addition to various kind of online scams, a lot of these are being perpetrated, we are concerned, via robocall. And bear in mind that with the tiny exception of, let's say, a doctor's office letting you know that your appointment has been canceled, or your airline telling you that your flight is delayed, robocalls for commercial purposes are flat out 100% illegal. So that's the message we say to consumers, is if somebody is trying to sell you something via robocall, they're already engaged in illegal activity. The next slide will let you know a little bit more about what we're doing in the warning letter area, both on behalf of just the FTC and in conjunction with our brothers and sisters at FDA. We have sent out more than 100 warning letters to companies dealing with primarily the kinds of cures and treatment kind of scams, or just deceptive practices in the marketplace. As I said, some with FDA, some just from the FTC. A lot of people are saying, well, why aren't you just going to court to sue them all? The good news about warning letters is that so far, generally speaking, they're working. Because what do we want in the short term? We want the companies to take down the ads. These are almost all online promotions, social media promotions. They have things on Twitter. They have things on Facebook. Our number one priority is take it down. And we have found warning letters to be a very quick and easy way to do that, especially that court systems are obviously not 100% up and running as they would be. So certainly we're seeing a lot in this area of the health-related scams and frauds. The second set of warning letters we've sent, some of these again with just the FTC, some the FTC and our brothers and sisters at the Federal Communications Commission are dealing with the robocallers that are perpetrating these scams. And certainly we are doing everything we can to go after them. A lot of them are global. A lot of them can be hard to track down. So that's not all we're doing. We have also contacted a number of the voice over internet protocol, the VoIP carriers, to say, someone is using your services. Here's the name of the company. They are using your services to perpetrate coronavirus scams. Cut it out. Stop them. Don't do business with them, because under the telemarketing sales rule, it's not only illegal to place those calls, it's illegal to assist and facilitate others to place those calls. So the first step, of course, is letting the robocallers know what they're doing is illegal. The second step is to let, for example, the VoIP providers, service providers, know what they're doing is illegal. So that's an example of one of these VoIP letters. We've taken it a third step, though. The next slide shows, I think, an unprecedented action that the FTC has taken with the FCC. We've contacted US Telecom, which is the trade association for many aspects of the telecom industry. And we've said to them, we are telling your people, your members, to quit facilitating these kinds of scams. And if they don't, we encourage your other members not to carry their calls at all. So that is enlisting the trade association. I included the very detailed legal language. I think this boils down to what I call a don't you be. Don't you be helping out other people. Don't engage in deceptive practices yourself, and don't you be helping out others. So this is kind of a warning through the trade association, which we think obviously in a self-regulatory effort will want to be helping out. It doesn't help them either. So these warning letters are something that's taking up a lot of our time. Next example of what we're doing is trying to compile resources for consumers. FTC.gov/coronavirus has 3 sets of resources. One for consumers dealing with the range of scams, another for businesses, and I would say especially for small businesses, and the third talks about what we're doing in the law enforcement area. So then this is what, if you go to ftc.gov/coronavirus, you'll see. You can pick what audience and what topics are most important to you. The next slide shows what we're seeing for consumers. We're doing a lot of infographics. We've done a lot of video that is sized for social media, saying now's the time, if you're going to be tweeting, if you're going to be posting on your Facebook, sure, post the pet pictures, post the great sourdough bread you're doing, but how about taking a second and also posting some resources to help your friends and colleagues and social network to stop scams themselves. So we're doing a lot to provide graphic information to, in effect, deputize consumers to be on the lookout and to help warn others in their community, in their neighborhoods, how to stop these forms of scams. The next slide shows what we're doing for businesses in this area. We are posting an awful lot on our business blog. One of the first ones was 7 coronavirus scams that are targeting small businesses, and you're going to be hearing about many of those in just a moment. We also posted a helpful one last week, which were 10 tips for safer video conferencing. All of us, quite obviously, are doing this a lot more right now. And there are, is there a perfect way to guarantee security? Unfortunately not, but there are a number of steps that folks can take, changes to default settings to pick the more secure option that offer a lot of benefits for businesses in this area. So in addition to watching out for the scams, we're suggesting ways to have safer remote workplaces, which I know something that is very dear to the heart of both panelists and listeners here. The next slide shows what we're doing in the area of law enforcement. So far, we have brought 2 cases. Again, aside from warning letters, these are 2 go to court and try to stop them cases. The first is pending. It deals with a Rhode Island company that says we are a direct lender for the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program. Baloney, says the FTC, that in fact they are not. They were, collecting a lot of information from consumers. They were saying that they were affiliated with the SBA. The FTC alleges they are not, and we have gone to court to stop that kind of deception. Next, we have an example of what we're doing in the cure area. The next slide shows that. This is the typical kind of, this was a, kind of a tablet that is claiming to provide an antiviral wellness boost to protect consumers against coronavirus. Our law is and always has been that companies cannot make scientific claims like this or health claims without having solid science in hand before they make these representations. So we are alleging we have gone and have a stipulated preliminary injunction in hand and are challenging claims that this company made. My final slide is just the ways that we think we can all work together. I think first I would suggest for businesses especially to subscribe to FTC business blog alerts. For consumers, of course, we have FTC consumer blog alerts. Go to ftc.gov/subscribe. We don't spam you much, I promise, but it's an easy way to get 250 words several times a week about what the latest scams are. You could also go to ftc.gov/coronavirus to see what the latest developments are in law enforcement. You can share FTC resources on your own sites, with your clients, with your customers, with your employees, especially employees who may be facing financial difficulty. Maybe they've had a spouse lose a job. Maybe they're facing problems with student loans, with car notes, with mortgages. You can share information there. And also you can, in addition to just reporting at ftc.gov, I have the shortest email in the business, lfair@ftc.gov. I work for you. You sign my paycheck. I am grateful to that. And you can rest assured that we at the FTC, in addition to these areas, are also very involved in what you're going to be hearing about in a moment, which are the cyber risks that COVID-19 has started to pose.
Lesley, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having the Federal Trade Commission share their insights. And it's also reassuring to know that good people like you are working on our behalf to protect us. So as a taxpayer, I am so appreciative of everything that you're doing, particularly with the Bureau of Consumer Protection. It's just wonderful work. And Leslie's going to stick around for Q&A when we come around to it here. And so now I'm going to turn it over to John Clay and Bill Malik, both from Trend Micro. And John's going to kick us off here with the threat landscape using coronavirus as a lure. And so as Lesley talked about, now we're going to move into the cybersecurity space of these scams that are using coronavirus or COVID-19 as an entry point. And so, John, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you giving us some time today to help out the understanding education of folks on what we're seeing. If you can go to the next slide. The Trend Micro has been following this since it broke. We obviously, as a cybersecurity organization, track lots of different threats, lots of types of threats. And, you know, over the years, I've been in cybersecurity for almost 24 years now, and the threat actors out there will constantly look for news, look for ways to socially engineer their attacks against victims. And COVID came along and it gave them a great opportunity. As Lesley said, this has been just a tremendous opportunity for scammers in general. And cyber scammers, cyber threats, cyber actors are no different. They are taking advantage of this. The information you're seeing here comes from our what we found in Q1, all of Q1. So you can see over 900,000 spam messages we saw in Q1. An interesting one was the increase in URLs, the 260% increase in malicious URL hits from February to March. We're seeing massive numbers of domains being registered that are associated with a lot of the organizations related that are dealing with this. So whether it's the Federal Trade Commission, ftc.gov instead of FTC, it's some other word that or letter that maybe people don't realize. The WHO is getting a World Health Organization, CDC. All of these organizations are getting domains that are registered that we call typo squatted domains, which are similar. The domain name is very similar, but it's not the actual one. So that's a huge number as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is a breakdown of what we're seeing. So most people are going to have to deal with email-based threats. So almost 95% of the threats that we saw in Q1 were email-based. Another 5% were malicious URLs, and then a small portion we're seeing obviously in BEC or business email compromise stuff. But majority of the time when you are going to receive something, it will be via email. And we see this in general, even with all the other types of threats, whether it's ransomware, whether it's other types of threats. The initial infection comes through an email targeting you or your employees in a socially engineered fashion. So next slide, please. And again, when we look at the actors, so Emotet is a banking malware that's been around for a long time, but there's a group behind it. So the Emotet actors behind it they took advantage of it very quickly. We saw a lot of their campaigns now that they are launching are coronavirus or COVID-19 based scams. So again, the initial spam email that they will deliver tends to have some form of coronavirus as the lure of it. So next slide, please. And you see a couple of examples of the spam messages. So again, as I mentioned, almost 95% of the threats we saw were email based. And so when you look at the spam messages and what they are sending, you can see here a couple of types. Shipment notifications. So they're going to target your shipping and receiving employees with emails that purportedly come from DHL, coming from US Postal Service, et cetera. And the language inside the message will have something associated with like oh, because of the pandemic we're having, we had to change the schedule for your delivery, and click on the link or click on the attachment. Usually the attachment's going to have some similar name to it. It'll have, shipping notification or something other than that. Another one is obviously update to the situation at hand. So a lot of the actors are going to embed language in the message that is saying here's an update of the situation. There's a new vaccine associated with it, right? As Lesley was talking about, all these scams that you're seeing from people selling product that supposedly either cures or helps with the situation. Same thing we're seeing here, where people are looking for information, so the bad guys are going to take advantage of that and try and send you an informational based messages as well. You can go to the next slide, please. Here's a couple of other examples. We actually had one that came to one of our executives that was interesting, where the message said, "I will infect your family if you don't send me 2 Bitcoins." So they're threatening to infect a family if you don't pay them a certain amount of ransom. So we're seeing that ransomware actors are definitely utilizing this as their to get into the organization. So again, using the coronavirus as a lure to get the employee either to click on a link in the message, or to open up an attachment that's usually going to be a weaponized piece of malware. Some of the emerging techniques we're seeing, they're targeting specific countries for sure. China's being hit. Italy and a lot of European countries are being targeted quite often here. Business email compromise. So in this scam, we're seeing a lot of supplier swindle. So what they are doing is they are purporting to be a supplier of an organization, sending an email again to finance or somebody saying, "Hey, because we've had a challenge with this situation, we've had to change the banking area we're going to with the invoice here. So wire transfer the invoice to this account instead of the normal account." Again, it's going to the scammers, not the right people. Ransomware, as I mentioned, also sextortion related scams have picked up quite often in this area as well. So all of these are going to be socially engineered emails that are going to target victims in some way, shape, or form using this type of information. Next slide, please. Besides email, we also are seeing other areas. So on the left-hand side, this is an interactive map you may be familiar with. Johns Hopkins University produced this map, and it was so well received out in the world that we saw this in the Russian underground. They started selling a copy of this actual map. It was a functioning map, but embedded within the map is a information stealing malware. So they were selling this. We're seeing it sold on the underground. Somebody would send it in. You would get an email message or some other, whether it could be a website that's saying, "Hey, download this app." It gives you the information from Johns Hopkins about where infections lie around the world. But again, embedded inside that, they took the original and just weaponized it, made it into a piece of malware that was information stealing. And as Lesley mentioned, one of the main reasons that they are trying to infect people is to gather information from the user. So again, personal information, email account information, credit card information, etc. On the right-hand side, you see we're even seeing mobile actors getting in on it. So the mobile actors are creating apps that are fraudulent apps, but they look like they're doing something. So they're this example, it was a mobile ransomware named COVID Lock. Said it's supposed to help track cases. So in this case, they dropped this on a couple of the third-party stores out there, making people think they were going to download a tracking app for COVID-19, and in fact, it would drop ransomware on their phone. Next slide, please. Again, and even Lesley mentioned, being an organization that supplies information out there, we're seeing a lot of websites, phishing sites that are being created. On the right, on the left-hand side, you see here a World Health Organization. On the right-hand side, it's a fake Center for Disease Control. But again, and a lot of what they are doing here in this case, these cases, is are creating phishing web pages. So when you get infected, it'll pop up a web page for you to log in to their site. It could be logging into a Office 365 site. It could be a email account. It could be, in this case, a World Health Organization login. But again, trying to get you to enter your credentials. If you enter your credentials, instead of going to the right organization, it'll go to the bad actors, and they will then have your account information that they can then utilize against you or sell in the underground to others to use against you. Next slide, please. Social media hasn't been stopped either. We're seeing a lot more social media scams. In this case, you can see here an example of a Facebook Messenger message that came into a user. Again, if you click here, click on this again, I think it pops up another item. In this case, Netflix. On the left-hand side, it's kind of showing you the social media account, and they are utilizing people that like social media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter. All of these are going to be utilized against you as well as an organization or as an individual. So we will see this continue as well. Next slide, please.
And John, can we point out the link specifically, that bit.ly link?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a good item to point out. If you are looking at and you get these informations, a lot of them are using bit.ly because it's shortened the full URL, and you may not be able to see the full URL. As I mentioned before, they're probably going to register a domain that looks similar to the organization that they want you to think they are. So in Facebook.com. So instead of Facebook.com, it'll be something similar, but not. So one thing you want to do is make sure when you look at either hover over those with your mouse to bring up the actual domain, or check those domains with an organization that can check the reputation of that URL. But yeah, they definitely will use those shortened URLs to try and fool you into clicking on it and going to the one. So if you do get to another page, if it redirects you to a page, be sure to look at the domain associated with that in the URL itself. And this is, again, they are trying to get you, and they'll pop up a Facebook login page, because their, again, ultimate end game is to get your Facebook credentials so that they can take over your account and do things that they would want to do. Next slide, please. You can click again here. We got a couple of things here. So again, and that one was actually interesting. They wanted you to actually share it with multiple friends before you did anything else with it. So the underground is interesting as well. And this is my last slide. We've been following the underground communities for a long time here. This is, and they are taking advantage of this as well, whether it's selling malware and exploits associated with scams. So they're selling it to other criminals in the underground, but they're also selling goods and services in the underground. We saw toilet paper being sold in the underground to other actors out there, masks, etc. Most of these are scams, and they're even trying to scam the scammers themselves. So, but it's interesting that this also is a phenomenon in the underground markets as well, not just out there in the public markets. So, but again, with that said, I'll turn it over to the next speaker to talk more about best practices, but just be aware, these scammers are going to go after you regardless, whether it's email-based, web-based, social media-based, mobile-based, all of them they were going to take advantage of. So thanks, and take care.
All right, thanks so much, John. And again, for those of you who are on the line, John will stick around for our Q&A session here at the end. And so now that you have heard about some of the scams that are targeting both businesses and consumers, now we're going to hear from Bill and Patrice about what you can do. What are some best practices so you can protect yourself? And again, what Lesley said, to deputize you. I love that phrasing. For you to go out and help other people understand what they can do to protect themselves from these scammers. And so, Bill, I am going to turn it over to you for the next few slides.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so I just had a comment on the sextortion scams. I actually got one about 2 weeks ago that said, you know, we've taken over your machine, we've taken over your camera, we've taken over your microphone, we've been able to record what you were looking at and what you were doing while you were looking at it. And it was sort of a poser to me. To quote the old Joan Rivers line, if my webcam could talk, it would yawn. Anyway, the chart here discusses layered messaging security. We're looking at the idea that you don't want to just use one thing. You want to use and deploy a multitude of techniques to block unfamiliar emails. Turn on your junk email filtering, turn on your spam filters, be scrupulous about that. Assume when something comes externally that there's a good chance it's fake. I think it's still the case that when you look at the internet traffic overall, 90% of the traffic is fraudulent in some way. And the reason is it's free. And even if you get a hit rate out of 1 of 100,000, you make one successful fraudulent action and it covers your costs and your power bill and everything else. If we could go to the next slide. We have a deck full of best practices. I'm just going to highlight a couple. This is for people who are working remotely, as well as in the office, home office. Make sure that your cyber defense is more than just a firewall. You want to make a copy of your data. You want to have a reliable place from which you can recover. Be cautious with public Wi-Fi. Use techniques, tools available. Make sure the sites you're looking at are secure, and you'll even get a warning now from most browsers that'll tell you if the site is not secure. But our recommendation is, why bother? Just go someplace safe. Use cloud for backup, and make sure that your backup has both an on-prem option and a cloud option. Have 2 sources. That way, if something goes wrong locally, it's a simple fix. If you lose internet connectivity, you still have a recent backup of your stuff. Similarly, if you're out, if you're traveling, if you don't have your backup drive, you can go to the cloud and get your stuff. Keep safe. Next slide, please. We're talking about passwords. So here's the question. Suppose you want to create a password, and once upon a time, I used to smoke a pipe, and there was actually a place, a club, a tobacconist that had a porch out back, and you could, try some tobacco and light up and watch the sunset. And so the password club pipe might occur to you. Or you could make it tricky by changing the I into a 1. Or this deck looked out over a river, so you could say club pipe wave. Well, let's make it a capital C and put in a number. What we're trying to say is longer is better. Adding the special characters, the upper and lower case, changing letters into numbers, that's really making it very hard to remember. Which I did I change into a 1? Which A did I replace with an ampersand? Well, what I want to tell you is go for length. It's easy to remember, and here you go. Club pipe will take 5 seconds for most attackers to break. Club pipe wave barking, there was a dog running by as you were sitting on the deck smoking your pipe looking at the water. That's a 16 billion years. That's probably enough. If you're protecting nuclear codes, well then, yeah, use the longest one, but you're probably going to write that one down. Okay. That's the end of my TED Talk. Let's go to the next slide. Here what we're looking at is for devices, for servers, and this is both small business and home office. Make sure you have a centrally managed cybersecurity technology. Doesn't mean the person who's doing the management has to be in the office. A lot of this stuff can be done mobile and remote. Make sure that your payment systems are isolated. Make sure that what you're using for work is separate than what you're using for home. Most organizations that ask employees to work from home, we'll be able to provide them with some kind of technology and some kind of security capability. I would just point out the last couple of things. If you can, implement two-factor authentication. When I connect to my bank, I put in my ID and my password, and then it asks me, do you want us to call you or do you want us to send you a message on the prearranged phone? And finally, try to keep your software current. Just consider it, cyber hygiene. Just like, you change the sheets, you wash the dishes, just check to see if you got any updates pending for your software. Next slide, please. And finally, in this deck, about mobile devices. This is very, very important for people working at home. I would encourage you to get a copy of this slide. I used to serve as the chief technology officer for my neighborhood. My friends, relatives, neighbors would drop by and ask me questions, and it was my point to help. So I'm going to take one of Lesley's, cybersecurity deputy badges and proudly wear it and say, yeah, if you got a question, I can help you. Now, to be honest, I'm not as good at Mac as I am at PC. Make sure your systems are updated. Use the security that comes with them. This applies to phones too. Phones have complex operating systems. The applications are complex. Turn off permissions you don't need. Some phones have apps that are just so greedy. Would you like to view this ping? Well, we need to have access to all your media, your calendar, your voice files. Like, no, you don't. I don't need that app. Many devices come with Bluetooth enabled. Turn it off. A Bluetooth device will be, in its default mode, will be searching for connections. I'll be looking for other places to talk to. Along the same line, don't connect to unsecure Wi-Fi. Only use apps from trusted sources. If you get a phone call, and I'd like Lesley's feedback on this, I'm getting phone calls where they ring once and hang up. The temptation is to call back and say, what's up? But if I call back and connect, I may be routed to a pay for service. So they're collecting dollars while I'm trying to figure out why did they call me. Use the passwords I talked about. Don't give out as much personal data as you'd like. It's okay to be friendly, but don't be too generous. And use a vendor security product. Trend Micro, we've got good ones. Our founder, Eva Chen, has said, the bad guys, the competition are the bad guys. If you are using a vendor security product, good on you. Keep using it. Keep it up to date. Run it regularly. That's my last slide. I'll be around for comments and questions.
Great, thank you so much, Bill. I wrote down a few notes that we're gonna bring up after your talk. I think that's great, or after Patrice's talk here. And so, Bill will be around here for Q&A. And now we're going to continue the discussion of best practices here with Patrice. And Patrice, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
You're coming through perfectly.
All right. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. Great panelists, John, Lesley, and William, and Bill have really highlighted things that we need to be aware of. Just diving quickly into a couple of steps that will help minimize the risk. One of the things that I like to start by saying is that one of the things we observe nowadays is everybody are afraid of hackers because we think that they are technology savvy. But one thing that we forget to think of is the psychological aspect of their threat. They are more led towards tricking you into a behavior that will expose you or lead you to make a mistake that would then later be exploited. One of the things that in talking about minimizing the risk, even if we have password security and things, we lose the tendency of checking the sender of an email. And it takes literally not even a fraction of a second to just read who is the sender. The moment we read the name of the person who's sending the email, we immediately assume that we know who that is, and we move on into taking action and getting ourselves into trouble. If you can move on, John, please. You can bring all those points up, and we're just going to go through them for the time's sake. All right, so now, and on the second point here, I talk about taking careful look at any email that requires an action. Most of the time when an email has a subject line that is suggesting that there's an action that needs to be taken, or it's inviting you to do something, some way to mitigate those kind of risks is just reading that email twice. and you start finding out some grammatical errors or something that won't make sense. Just take that extra reading of that email before something goes bad. Now, and also clicking on links on open attachment, we hear it often, we hear it a lot, but again, we cannot stress enough that this is the most important, one of the most important steps to take. If you have to click on something, you have to be sure that you know the origin, and that implies that you've checked the senders, you've read the email, you've read the text message a second time, and nothing really gave you a feeling that it's not okay. And so all those things would really help. On my point number 5 there, I call it the extra measure of human security. What do I mean by that? When you receive a lot of mistake in phishing is that you receive an email that is compelling from the organization chief or the HR, the human resources, and you are compelled to do it. And it takes just an extra, again, it's the matter of time. Just call the person and say, hey, I've received this email. You're asking for all these personal information. Is that you? Or and those steps that may be a little extra can save hundreds of thousands of dollars to a company, just to think about it. And I would just jump with the last one here to, again, provide ongoing employee training. I'm a big advocate to trainings because I believe that as much as we can give out tools and tips to let people know what needs to be done, if they're not repetitive refresher, something that kind of help the employees or even friends or family, like Bill says, he is the one in his neighborhood to help everybody. It helps to have someone or to have some kind of repository of those best practices and ongoingly repeating those training, and also can help organizations staying safe. On to my next and last slide, please. Now, and here, some of the things that Bill have mentioned are repeated here. Again, that is because we believe that these are ways to help you. So I'm not going to repeat all of it. One of the things that I really believe it's relevant is that when we receive concern of an account that could have been overtaken, the immediate thing to do is to change the password. Now, here's the thing. Hackers know that you would change your password. Most of the time, what we've observed is that they now can take over your account and just sit. And what they're doing, they observe your behavior, they read your email alongside with you, they start gathering an intel of who you really are. And that's how they can be successful at crafting an email of ransom, and you will fall into it. So before changing your password, make sure you verify your recovery setting. Make sure that nothing has been changed there, because the moment you try to log in and you click on forgot password, that's it. Now you will be kicked out of the account and you can't have access anymore. Another thing that also is relevant to the pandemic and this difficult time we're dealing with is that now we are more prone to do a lot of shopping online, not because we want to, but because to some extent we are forced to. And most people would use their debit card. Now, remember, your debit card is directly tied to hard-earned money. That's your savings and everything. So one of the best precautions we can offer is to encourage you to use a prepaid card. Whereas if that card gets compromised, that was just that card where you've loaded money instead of using your own. And I'd like to start with this step number 9. Talk to your peers and community. Again, I think at the end of this, we all become deputy, according to Lesley. It is important to talk to somebody. Do not feel that because you have experienced something, isolating yourself will bring the solution. No. And sometimes even before taking an action, talk to someone. Actually pick up the phone, call, hey, I'm dealing with this thing. I've observed this. And is that normal? Actually, about 2 days ago, I found out that some people could be giving out their newly received credit card information during the process of activating it, because it only takes dialing a wrong number to activate the card and getting to someone who identified that you're a naive person, and they'll gather the card number. And so we want to really be aware of all these little things, but more importantly, we need to talk to one another. We need to be able to open up and question some of those things. That will be what I would say here, Daniel, and I'll stay around for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Patrice. These are amazing resources and precautions. And though you didn't cover all of them, they're all equally important. And so thankfully, we're going to have, everyone's going to have a copy of these slides and also the resources that we send along with the email, both from Generali, from the Federal Trade Commission, and from Trend. Will all three will have resources on a lot of this guidance. I'll also direct all of you. Now we're going to move into the Q&A session with all of our speakers. And so while you're submitting your questions, I'm going to cover just a few resources and updates. One is National Cybersecurity Alliance's COVID-19 Security Library, and you can find that on our website. But we've pulled together, we started seeing a lot of resources that were coming out on the coronavirus and COVID scams and how to telework securely. And we were trying to pull all these resources together into one location. And so you'll see a lot of what our partners are talking about on the webinar here today. Those will be featured on this, in addition to many other resources as well. So we encourage you to check that out if you're looking for additional learning on this topic. And we have one column specifically dedicated to scams. I also want to let you know about a few upcoming webinars. On May 12th, we're going to be talking specifically about phishing, vishing, and smishing. So how are these cyber criminals accessing you not only through email, through the phishing, but through phone scams and through text-based scams. So we're going to be talking about those specifically and the mechanisms around that. On May 26th, we're going to have a repeat of this webinar with a few different speakers talking about COVID-19 scams again. And Lesley will be joining us again. June 9th, we're going to be focusing on telework security. And July 14th, we'll have Patrice back, I think, or someone from Generali Global Assistance, talking about business identity theft specifically. So not only can your identity be stolen as an individual, but your business identity can be stolen. So we're going to be talking about that as well. And all of those can be accessed on the StaySafeOnline.org website. And so with that, I'm going to unmute our speakers here. All right, everybody is unmuted. And we're going to go to some questions. And one of the first questions we had was, any thoughts or recommendations as far as password managers? What are should people be using them? Are they secure? What are your thoughts on that? And anyone can start.
You're muted, Bill.
This one, but just
There we go, Bill. You're unmuted now.
teasing. I do not use a password manager myself. Many of my colleagues do. They like them and use industry reports, and you can find a good one.
Yeah, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, we do not promote specific goods and services, but there are a lot of really great resources like Consumer Reports out there that evaluate the different products. They are a good mechanism for if you have a lot of passwords that you need to keep track of. They're a good way to store those.
Yeah,
this is
John. Yeah, this is John. I would say I utilize one, and I would be lost without it. I have 60 different accounts that I have to manage, and so I wouldn't want to have to figure out 60 different unique passwords. The other nice thing about password managers is they can actually create a very strong password for each of your accounts for you. And a lot of them also will work not only on your PC or Mac, but also your mobile devices. So if you're logging into your accounts via a mobile device, it can help you as well. So I highly recommend it because, again, the recommendation out there is never to reuse passwords and make sure the passwords are strong enough. A password manager can make sure you accomplish both of those.
We have a great question that came in as far as schools. Are any of you seeing any security attacks specifically targeting schools, which are many times under-resourced organizations, just like the small, medium-sized business community that we're talking about much through this webinar? Are you seeing any attacks to schools or on schools?
What I've seen, and John can go into more depth on this, is we've seen COVID-related assault, emails, as John and Lesley mentioned, but the payload is ransomware. And so what happens is you get a note to the administrator or the school nurse, an important update from World Health Organization, whatever. They click on the link, and then the school's subject to a ransomware attack. So it's another attack vector. I haven't seen anybody attempting to extort money directly by saying we'll infect your school or expose your students, but I'm sure that that's going to be right around the corner.
Lesley, is the FTC seeing anything?
Yeah, I mean, certainly this was kind of pre-COVID and during COVID that we are seeing schools, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, are often a favorite of scammers who use various phishing means simply because they know that a lot of different people may be responsible for, let's say, buying supplies. And so what we've noticed with schools and small nonprofits, they will claim to be offering, the merchandise that folks are looking for. We have the hand sanitizer and the paper towels or whatever it is, the materials you need, when in fact, really, it's just a malicious attempt, to grab credit card numbers and personal information. That was going on pre-COVID. Unfortunately, it still is going on to a certain extent, attacking schools as well as other smaller government entities as well as nonprofit groups.
Great, thank you.
Daniel, if I may, I know we are talking specifically about attacking school. There is always these concepts that now that schools are most of them online, the Zoom bombing we've been hearing about. It's maybe isolated to certain cases. And I received a call yesterday, actually, from my county advising that there was a school incident where during class, somebody took over one of the teachers. It was a kindergarten, 1 day a week meeting that they were having, and the person started exposing themselves. You can tell that it was a concerning matter, not only for parent, and I know we're talking about school, but it still goes back to each individual person managing accounts, managing those meetings. The training aspect of knowing what to do in those instances could make a big difference, or even how to restrict the access to the account. And some of the issue is that some teacher may have missed the latest email updating on the practices and are still going with the oldest practices that are now no longer relevant and not even secure. So there's that constant need of keeping the team aware. And I think sometimes we may have to stop just the email and just call everybody and say, hey, listen, did you check the email? These are the security threat that we're having, and then we'll send you an email to pay attention to on the next step to follow. So I just kind of wanted to point that out, given the fact that I was directly concerned about that as well.
That's a great addition. We do have another question that came in about, is there anything you can do to prevent your email address from getting on these lists that bad actors use? How are they getting these email addresses and reaching you? Can you prevent that?
Yeah, this is John. So one of the challenges, obviously, is a lot of the data that scammers get from you come from third-party breaches of organizations that you've already given that information to. So you may not get hacked, but if you've given that information to someone else who gets hacked and breached, a lot of that information is going to go to them anyway. Again, the main recommendation there is limit the number of accounts if you can that you utilize that email address with. And then if you do use that email address as your username for a lot of your accounts, make sure you have different passwords and strong passwords for all of those. And then secondarily, if you do get notified by any of the organizations that get breached and have your data, obviously the first recommendation is very quickly change your account credentials as quickly as possible so that scammers can't utilize them.
Yeah, I'd like to add just 2 points to what John, the very good points John has raised. I think first is everybody's concern about data breach fatigue. The notion that, are consumers taking this as seriously as they need to? We believe, now more than ever, consumers need to be paying close attention when they receive this, that we don't want people to get just used to data breaches as the way things work. We have brought hundreds of cases challenging business practices that have allowed data breaches to happen. And we're going to continue to be very concerned about that. The other thing that I would mention is we get this question a lot, Daniel, about, isn't there something like a national do not call registry for email? Why aren't, what about that? It's such a common question that it's becoming a phishing attempt. That we have seen phishing attempts that fake an FTC, to kind of spoof an FTC or an FCC email address that say, we're the government and just give us your email address. Let us know if you want this email to be placed on our national do not email list. And please also give us the additional information we're going to need just to verify, for example, your social security number, your something like that. So this has become, such a trope that it's even something that scammers are using in an effort to ensnare consumers.
Oh, that's good for us to keep an eye out for. Thanks for bringing that up.
Daniel, can I, again, just adding to John and Lesley, great points as well. One of the things is also the places where we provide our email where we don't even have an actual business with. We are tempted to provide our email for survey in a one-time restaurant where you sat and dined and you probably would not go back there necessarily. Yes, you've provided your email, you had this great experience shopping, and again, the problem is that it's not about necessarily not using your email, but it's to understand that, okay, I'm giving an email which can later be used to affect me, but to what extent? What was the value of the service or that I wanted, or the shopping experience that I wanted, that led me to give that one email address, which later appears numerous times on data breaches sites. So that's something also to think about.
My standard response in a retail setting, I mean, obviously in an online shopping setting, they're going to, to verify the account and things like that. But think how many times back when we were shopping at retail places, when on the checkout they said, what's your email address? I have come to say it's unlisted, and I'm amazed that no one has ever pushed back on that. The typical kind of department store or restaurant does not need an email address to accept my money to do business. And I'm thrilled to say that my kind of non sequitur of it's unlisted seems to work.
Those are great additions. Thank you both for that. And so I realize that it is almost 10 minutes past 3. We have gone over our time. So I'm sorry for not being a better manager of our time, but I've been engrossed in the conversation. It's been great questions and great answers. And so I've been distracted. I apologize. I first off want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, Lesley, Patrice, and John and Bill. And they've provided us with a wealth of information, and they have deputized you to now go out and educate others on this topic. And we'll be sending you a lot of the resources that they have so carefully crafted so that you can continue to evangelize and educate yourself and others about the current scams that are going on. And take note that these scammers won't stop once COVID-19 and coronavirus is over, right? When the next crisis happens, they will be right on it, whether it's the next hurricane, the next tornado, the next health crisis, they'll be on it as well. So always remain hyper vigilant of what what criminals as a whole are going to be taking advantage of. And mostly it's taking advantage of your generosity, taking advantage of your vulnerability, your fear, etc. And so I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Trend Micro and to Generali Global Assistance and the Federal Trade Commission for making this information available to you all. And I want to thank all of you for spending over an hour with us today on this webinar. And so with that, thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful and safe rest of the week. And we'll see you on our next webinar.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody.